Last year, the Cruiserweight Classic was a phenomenal tournament from start to finish on the WWE Network. This year, WWE has the Mae Young Classic, which is a tournament for 32 women. From watching the introduction of all the women, this was upsetting. I don't mean to say that this tournament is going to be terrible, but they're crazy if they think that this is going to be as great as the Cruiserweight Classic. Let's look at some of their flaws with the planning and presentation of this tournament so far. First of all, they're going to marketing this like how it's such a momentous occasion to be a women's wrestler. How progressive this is, so many familiar faces appearing at ringside like this is something very special. It reminds me of the new Ghostbusters. Maybe the main roster women do enjoy being there, but you don't need to sugarcoat this as a progressive movement. Most of us that are gonna watch already know that. The Cruiserweight Classic didn't need any of that. I couldn't stand the marketing with that either, but they advertised outstanding matches, which the Mae Young Classic is not doing. They're putting more focus on who's appearing at these matches than the actual wrestlers in the ring. We're not being promised any great matches. They all might be, but that's not what they're presenting here. Triple H can tell us how equal women are going to be all he wants, but the only way I can know that to be true is if you actually tried to make it like the Cruiserweight Classic. It's obvious that they aren't. Let's talk the participants, because there is no diversity when you compare it to the Cruiserweight Classic. Head and shoulders, the Cruiserweight Classic's field blows this field out of the water. I'm excited to get to watch Kairi Sane, Santana Garrett, Dakota Kai, Candice LeRae, Shayna Baszler, Piper Niven, Mia Yim. Serena Deeb is a pleasant surprise too. But I'm not intrigued with much of the rest of the field. To be honest, I never heard of most of the field from the Cruiserweight tournament either, but I was intrigued to see what they could do. Talents like Fabian Aichner, DeMac, Alejandro Saez, Klamath Patwa, people that actually wrestled in other parts of the world. It was awesome. Various matchups you would never see before and never see again. Kota Ibushi vs Cedric Alexander. Gran Metalik vs Tajiri. TJP vs Johnny Gargano. Akira Tozawa vs Jack Gallagher. Because all of these women are already signed, these aren't once-in-a-lifetime matches you're giving us. We're likely going to see Kairi Sane vs Lacey Evans many times on some kind of show. Half the women in this tournament are already signed to WWE contracts and have been developing in the Performance Center, so that doesn't intrigue me that much. That doesn't tell me that I could go to China to watch women's wrestling, when the two women in the tournament that represent China have signed WWE contracts before learning how to work matches. They may turn out to be decent in the ring, but you first had to sign them and train them, which is not the same as actually scouting women in China that already make career wrestling to specifically put in the tournament, like with what they have done in the Cruiserweight Classic. You would be surprised with the women's wrestling scenes in Europe and South America. Is that really fair to women who are from those regions that would die for the opportunity? No. Which leads to my next point, there is a lack of diversity. When more than half of the field is American, and many of them are already under contract, you can't really call it an international tournament. The Cruiserweight Classic had only 9 Americans, and that was fine. We got to see several different wrestling styles. Powerhouses, high flyers, luchadors, technicians and strikers. This tournament, from what I have seen, lacks that. There aren't that many high flyers, there's not that many submission specialists, most of these women have no specialty. There's not much personality to the field either. Many of the women, especially on the American side, are bland. All the men in the Cruiserweight Classic showed both talent and character. Most of the women lack one or the other. WWE has had a rich history of Canadian-born talent. Look at all these names. You might have assumed that there are a couple of Canadians that might be in this tournament as well. Actually, yep. More than half the field is representing the United States, but there are an astounding 0 participants from Canada. What's especially troubling is that Canada is not just another country when it comes to women's wrestling. Canada has a very bustling scene of women's wrestlers, almost rivaling that of the USA and Japan. Canada should have had no less than 3 women in the tournament, And it's not as if there's any shortage of names that could have been picked, or any visa issues for many Canadians to work the tapings in Florida. But if I were to ask Triple H as to why there are no neighbors to the north in this tournament, he wouldn't give me an answer. Only one Japanese and Mexican are in this tournament, while those are other big wrestling markets too. I mean, even if you found some serviceable wrestlers that no one really knew about, that would have been fine too, because they would at least show some distinct wrestling styles that you can't find in 90% of the rest of the field. There are some questionable outcomes from the spoiler that I have read as well. There are some big names that have been ousted in the first round, one of which I had previously pegged to go all the way to the finals of the entire tournament. The opposite is happening as well, with some women who have just been learning to wrestle in the Performance Center moving on to later stages of the tournament, as if to tell us that they should be big deals in the company sometime down the road. If so, then why not put them in NXT? There was a period of time where NXT severely lacked female wrestlers and Triple H did nothing about it. The Mae Young Classic is obviously small budget compared to the CWC. It really shows. They didn't want to spend more money on a number of things. Visiting other countries, flying women from those countries, con actual commitments and what have you. Even all the tapings are back to back. I liked the Cruiserweight Classic because it was presented like a 10-episode series and not something that was taped entirely at once. I understand that it's to cut costs, but this is WWE we're talking about. Almost all of these women live in the US somewhere, I'm sure, but as I said before, you aren't convincing me how this is supposed to be as big of a deal as the Cruiserweight Classic, because the effort's not there, the budget's not there, and the intrigue is mostly artificial. That isn't to say that the matches won't be good, but the planning and presentation of it all could have been handled much better in my eyes.